The judgment chamber of the Valkyrie collective was cold and silent. Kirizen stood in the center of the room, her 4 arms bound in silver chains that hummed with energy. Her compound eyes stared forward at the 3 council members who sat elevated above her. Their chitinous faces showed no emotion. That was the Valkyrie way. Emotion was weakness. Individuality was chaos. Kirizen of the 3rd production caste, the center council member spoke, his voice flat and mechanical. You have been found guilty of ideological contamination. You spread forbidden ideas among your fellow workers. You questioned the natural order of our society. Kirizen said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had asked simple questions in the communal dining hall. Why could some castes access education while others could not? Why were mates assigned rather than chosen? Why did questioning these things make her a criminal? The questions had seemed reasonable to her. But reason, she learned, was only permitted within approved boundaries. The council has determined your sentence, another member continued. You will be exiled to a human settlement. You will serve a human family for 1 standard cycle. Perhaps living among such chaotic and primitive beings will teach you to appreciate the order and perfection of the collective. Kirizen's antennae trembled. She had heard stories about humans. They were violent, emotional, disorganized. They fought wars among themselves. They allowed their young to make their own choices, which resulted in chaos and waste. The collective considered them barely civilized, useful only for their agricultural techniques and their willingness to trade. You depart tomorrow, the council member said. When you return, you will be reintegrated. The contamination will be removed from your mind. You will resume your assigned role. This conversation is concluded. The transport ship was small and cold. Kirizen sat alone in the cargo hold for 3 days, her chains finally removed but her spirit still bound by fear. What would the humans do to her? Would they beat her? Starve her? She had no value to them except as punishment for her own people. Why would they show her any kindness? The ship landed on a human colony world called New Manitoba. The name meant nothing to Kirizen. The collective representative, a tall Valkyrie male from the diplomatic caste, escorted her through the spaceport. Humans walked past them, barely glancing in their direction. Some smiled. Kirizen did not understand why. They arrived at a dwelling far from the central colony. Fields of golden grain stretched in every direction. A simple house stood at the end of a dirt road. The representative knocked on the door and waited. Kirizen's legs trembled. All 4 of her arms wrapped around herself in an unconscious gesture of protection. The door opened. A human male stood there, wiping his hands on a cloth. He had dark hair touched with gray at the temples. His eyes were brown and tired but not cruel. He looked at the collective representative with an expression Kirizen could not read. Thomas Wade? The representative asked. That's me, the human said. I am delivering the rehabilitation assignment as per the agreement between our governments. This is Kirizen. She will serve your household for 1 standard cycle as part of her sentence for crimes against the collective. Thomas looked at Kirizen. She kept her eyes down as was proper for one of her caste. He looked back at the representative with what Kirizen would later learn was confusion and irritation. Serve my household, Thomas repeated slowly. You mean like a servant? Like property? She is a criminal undergoing rehabilitation, the representative said stiffly. The agreement clearly states. I read the agreement, Thomas interrupted. Bunch of bureaucratic nonsense if you ask me. I signed it because the colony council said it would help diplomatic relations. Nobody said anything about treating someone like property. The representative's antennae flicked with annoyance. How you choose to frame the arrangement is irrelevant. She is your responsibility for the next cycle. Her return transport will arrive on the assigned date. Good day. The representative left without another word. Thomas stood in the doorway looking at Kirizen. She remained perfectly still, waiting for orders. That was what she had been trained to do. Wait, obey. Never question. Well, come on in, Thomas said finally, stepping aside. No point standing out here. Kirizen entered the dwelling slowly. It was small but clean. Strange objects covered the walls. Images in frames. A child's drawings. Books on shelves. Nothing like the sterile communal spaces of the collective. I'm Thomas, the human said, closing the door. I guess you know that already. I run a farm here. Grain mostly. Some vegetables. He paused, seeming unsure of what to say next. You have a name I can actually pronounce? Kirizen is a mouthful. I am Kirizen of the 3rd production caste, she said softly, still not meeting his eyes. I have no other name. Right. Well, I'll stick with Kira if that's okay. Easier for my daughter too. Speaking of which, Sophie, come meet our guest. A small human child appeared from another room. She had the same brown eyes as Thomas but lighter hair pulled back in a tail. She looked at Kirizen with open curiosity, not fear. Kirizen had never been looked at that way before. Wow, Sophie said. You have 4 arms. That's so cool. Can you pick up 4 things at once? Sophie, manners, Thomas said gently. Sorry? I'm Sophie. I'm 8 years old. How old are you? Kirizen's translator Chip struggled with the casual tone. No one had ever asked her personal questions before. I have existed for 17 standard cycles, she managed. So you're like a teenager. Sophie said excitedly. Do you go to school? What's your favorite subject? Do you like reading? Sophie, give her some space, Thomas said. I'm sure she's tired from the trip. Kira, there's a guest room down the hall. Second door on the left. It's small but it's yours. You can put your things there and rest if you want. Kirizen had no things. She had arrived with nothing but the simple gray garment the collective had provided. She nodded and moved toward the hallway, grateful to escape the overwhelming strangeness of the situation. Oh wait, Thomas called after her. What do you want for dinner? We usually eat around 6. I was thinking of making pasta, but if you don't eat that or if you'd prefer something else, just let me know. Kirizen stopped walking. She turned slowly to look at Thomas. He was standing in the kitchen area, waiting for her response as if it mattered. As if her preference had value. I do not understand, she said quietly. Dinner? Thomas repeated. What would you like to eat? The question hung in the air like something impossible. In the collective, food was distributed based on caste and nutritional requirements. No one asked what you wanted. No one cared what you preferred. You ate what you were given when you were told to eat it. Why are you asking me? Kirizen whispered. Thomas looked genuinely confused. Because you live here now? Because you have to eat? Why wouldn't I ask you? Kirizen felt something strange and frightening move through her body. Her hands trembled. Her antennae drooped. For the first time in her life, someone had asked her what she wanted. And she had absolutely no idea how to answer. The first morning arrived with light streaming through the window of the guest room. Kirizen had not slept. In the collective, sleep periods were announced by bells. Lights turned off at the designated time and turned on again exactly 8 hours later. But here no bells rang. No lights controlled her. She had simply lain in the bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to tell her what to do. When she finally emerged from the room, Thomas was already in the kitchen. The smell of something cooking filled the air. Sophie sat at a table, swinging her legs and reading from a digital tablet. Morning, Thomas said cheerfully. I made extra breakfast. Hope you like eggs. Coffee? Water? There it was again. A choice. Kirizen's mandibles clicked nervously. Water is acceptable, she said. Not what I asked, Thomas replied, pouring liquid into a cup. I asked what you'd like. I do not know what I like, Kirizen admitted, the words feeling strange and shameful. Thomas set the cup of water in front of her anyway. Then I guess you'll figure it out. That's what happens when you get to choose things. Sophie looked up from her tablet. Kira, do you want to see my room after breakfast? I have books and games and stuffed animals. Dad says sharing is important. I do not require entertainment, Kirizen said automatically. I should begin my work duties. What tasks have been assigned to me? Thomas paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Assigned? Kira, you're not a servant. I don't care what that bureaucrat said yesterday. You're staying here because some people with too much power made a dumb decision. That doesn't mean you have to work yourself to death. But I must have purpose, Kirizen insisted, her voice rising slightly. I must earn my place. I must prove my value. Your value isn't something you earn, Thomas said quietly. It's something you already have. Because you exist. That's enough. The concept made no sense. In the collective, value was determined by productivity, by obedience, by contribution to the whole. Individual existence meant nothing. Kirizen felt dizzy. The days that followed were disorienting. Thomas worked in his fields. Sophie attended school through her tablet. And Kirizen did not know what to do with herself. She tried to create structure. She woke at the same time. She cleaned the dwelling even though Thomas said she did not have to. She organized objects that did not need organizing. Anything to feel useful. But Sophie kept disrupting her routine. The child would bound into whatever room Kirizen occupied and ask questions. So many questions. What was the collective like? Did Kirizen have friends? What did she do for fun? Did her species play games? I do not understand fun, Kirizen said one afternoon. She was attempting to clean the kitchen for the third time that day. Sophie was sitting on the counter, swinging her legs and eating a fruit. Fun is when you do something and it makes you happy, Sophie explained. Like when I read stories or play with my friends or draw pictures. Don't you do anything that makes you happy? Happiness is not relevant, Kirizen said, repeating what she had been taught. Productivity is relevant. Order is relevant. That sounds really sad, Sophie said simply. The word struck something deep inside Kirizen. She stopped cleaning and stood very still. Was it sad? She had never thought about it before. Thinking about such things was not permitted. That evening something happened that changed everything. Sophie wanted to stay up past her bedtime to finish a story. Thomas said no. And Sophie argued with him. Kirizen watched in horror as the child raised her voice. As she said, "That's not fair, and you don't understand, and I'm not tired." In the collective, such behavior from a young one would result in immediate correction. Discipline. Punishment. Kirizen tensed, waiting for Thomas to strike the child or drag her away for reintegration. But Thomas did not move. He sat down and looked at Sophie with patient eyes. "I hear that you're upset," he said calmly. "You want to finish your story. I understand that. But you have school tomorrow and you need sleep. How about this? You go to bed now and tomorrow after school you can read for an extra hour. Does that work?" Sophie's face was red. Tears stood in her eyes. But she thought about it. Actually considered the offer. "Can I read for 2 extra hours?" she asked. 1.5, Thomas countered. "Final offer." "Okay," Sophie said, wiping her eyes. "Deal." She went to bed. Thomas did not punish her. Did not report her. Did not even seem angry. Kirizen stared at him in complete confusion. "Why did you not discipline her?" she asked. "She disobeyed. She challenged your authority." Thomas looked surprised. "She's 8. She wanted to finish her story. That's not a crime. We talked about it and found a compromise. That's how it works." "But she questioned you," Kirizen pressed. "She expressed disagreement. In the collective, such things are not permitted. Especially from the young." "Well, we're not in the collective," Thomas said gently. "Here people are allowed to disagree. Even kids. Especially kids, actually. How else do they learn to think for themselves?" That night, Kirizen could not stop thinking about what she had witnessed. Conflict without punishment. Disagreement without consequences. It seemed impossible. Dangerous. And yet, Sophie and Thomas seemed fine. Happy even. The next day, while Sophie was at school and Thomas was in the fields, Kirizen found herself drawn to the bookshelf in the living room. She had been taught to read human languages as part of her diplomatic processing. Her eyes scanned the titles. Most meant nothing to her. But then she saw one of Sophie's schoolbooks lying on the table. Human History, Rights and Revolutions. Kirizen picked it up with trembling hands. She knew she should not. Reading unauthorized materials was forbidden in the collective. But Thomas and Sophie were not here. And something inside her desperately wanted to know. She opened the book and began to read. The words swam before her eyes. Declarations of independence. Bills of rights. Movements where humans fought for freedom. For choice. For dignity. Concepts like all beings are created equal, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These ideas were forbidden in the collective. They were labeled as chaos theories. Dangerous contamination. But as Kirizen read, something awakened inside her. A small voice that whispered, "What if the collective is wrong?" She read about humans who had been enslaved and fought for freedom. About women who had been denied rights and demanded equality. About workers who organized for better treatment. Every page showed beings who had refused to accept that their value was determined by others. Kirizen heard the door open. She quickly closed the book, fear rushing through her. But it was only Sophie, home from school. "Oh, you found my history book," Sophie said excitedly. "Isn't it cool? We're learning about the civil rights movement. All these brave people stood up and said everyone deserves to be treated fairly. Ms. Anderson says it's one of the most important lessons we can learn." Kirizen's hands shook as she set the book down. "Your people teach this to children?" she asked. "They teach them to question authority? To demand change?" "Sure," Sophie said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "How else do things get better? How else do things get better?" The question echoed in Kirizen's mind for the rest of the day. In the collective, things did not get better. Things stayed the same. That was the point. Order. stability, unchanging structure. But what if change was not chaos? What if it was growth? That night at dinner, Thomas asked Kirizen how her day had been. Not what she had accomplished. Not what task she had completed. Just how her day had been. And for the first time, Kirizen tried something new. She told the truth. "I am confused," she said quietly. "Everything here is different from what I know. And I do not know if that is good or bad." Thomas smiled. "Confusion means you're learning. That's always good." 3 weeks passed like water flowing through Kirizen's fingers. Each day brought new experiences that would have been impossible in the collective. Each day the weight of her old life felt a little lighter. It started with Sophie's homework. The child struggled with mathematics, and one evening she sat at the kitchen table with tears of frustration in her eyes. Kirizen watched her for a moment, then quietly sat down beside her. "May I see the problem?" Kirizen asked. Sophie pushed the tablet toward her. "I don't get fractions. They don't make sense." Kirizen looked at the numbers. In the collective, mathematics was taught through repetition and memorization. But as she studied Sophie's confused face, something unexpected happened. Kirizen wanted to help her understand, not just memorize. "Imagine you have a whole fruit," Kirizen said, using her 4 hands to gesture. "Now imagine you cut it into 4 pieces. Each piece is 1/4 of the whole. If you eat 2 pieces, you have eaten 2/4. Does that make sense?" Sophie's eyes brightened. "Oh, so fractions are just parts of something bigger?" "Exactly," Kirizen said, and felt something warm spread through her chest. Later she would learn that humans called this feeling pride, joy, satisfaction. After that evening, Sophie asked Kirizen for help with her homework regularly. And Kirizen discovered something about herself. She loved teaching. She loved watching understanding dawn in Sophie's eyes. She loved the questions and the curiosity and the excitement of learning. "You're really good at this," Thomas said one night, watching Kirizen explain science concepts to Sophie. "Have you ever thought about being a teacher?" "In the collective, my caste does not teach," Kirizen said. "We produce. We manufacture. We build. Education is reserved for the higher castes." "Well, you're not in the collective right now," Thomas pointed out. "Maybe you could be whatever you want to be." The idea was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. The following weekend, Thomas invited Kirizen to attend a community gathering. She tried to refuse. Being around so many humans seemed overwhelming. But Sophie grabbed one of her hands and pulled. "Please come," the child begged. "Everyone's really nice. And there's food and music and games. You'll like it, I promise." Kirizen went, though her anxiety made her antennae twitch constantly. The gathering was held in a large community center in the colony's main settlement. Dozens of humans filled the space, talking and laughing and eating. The noise was chaotic. Nothing like the quiet, ordered meals of the collective. But something strange happened. People approached her with smiles. They introduced themselves. They asked her questions not to interrogate but because they were genuinely curious. A woman named Sarah shared food from her home planet. A man named Carlos showed her pictures of his children. A teenager named Maya asked about Valkyrie culture with respectful interest. "It's nice to meet you," people kept saying. And they seemed to mean it. Kirizen found herself talking. Actually talking. Sharing small stories. Laughing at jokes she did not quite understand but found amusing anyway. For the first time in her life she felt something she could not name. Later, Thomas told her the word was belonging. On the way home, Sophie fell asleep in the transport vehicle. Thomas drove quietly through the dark fields. Kirizen stared out the window at the stars. "Thank you for inviting me," she said softly. "You don't have to thank me," Thomas replied. "You're part of the community now. That's how it works here." "I do not understand how humans do this," Kirizen said. "In the collective, everything is structured. Everyone has a place, a role, a function. But here people just connect, without rules or assignments. How do you know where you fit?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You make your own place," he said finally. "It's harder that way sometimes. But it's also more real." Another week passed. Kirizen began to feel something she had never experienced before. Comfortable. Almost happy. She had routines now, but they were routines she chose. She helped Sophie with homework. She learned to cook human food. She read books from Thomas's shelf. She even started attending a weekly discussion group at the community center where people talked about philosophy and ideas. One evening, she found Thomas sitting on the porch, staring at an old photograph. She recognized the image from frames inside the house. A woman with kind eyes and dark hair stood beside Thomas, both of them smiling. "That is your mate," Kirizen said quietly, sitting down beside him. My wife, Thomas corrected gently. Her name was Anna. She died 2 years ago. Accident at one of the terraforming sites. Equipment malfunction. I am sorry, Kirizen said, because she had learned that humans said this when someone experienced loss. Thomas smiled, though his eyes were sad. Some days are harder than others. Sophie looks more like her every year. That's good and painful at the same time. In the collective, we do not speak of loss, Kirizen said. When someone dies, they are simply gone. Removed from records. We are taught that emotional attachment to individuals is inefficient. That sounds incredibly lonely, Thomas said. Kirizen realized he was right. It was lonely. She had spent her entire life surrounded by thousands of Valkyrie and had never felt truly connected to any of them. But here, with Thomas and Sophie, with Sarah and Carlos and Maya, she felt something different. Something real. How did you continue? She asked. After losing her? Thomas thought about it. I didn't have a choice but to continue. Sophie needed me. The farm needed me. But I also learned something important. Life doesn't stop for grief. You have to let people help you. You have to build new connections while honoring old ones. You have to believe that meaning and joy can exist even after terrible loss. That seems very difficult, Kirizen said. It is, Thomas agreed. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is shutting down. Refusing to feel anything. Existing without living. He looked at her. Kind of like what your collective wants you to do. The words hit Kirizen like a physical force. He was right. The collective did not want citizens who felt. Who connected. Who chose. They wanted efficient units that performed assigned functions without question or attachment. She was about to respond when a notification sound came from the house. Thomas went inside and returned a moment later with a data pad. His face was serious. Kira, he said quietly. You need to see this. The message was from the collective diplomatic office. Official. Cold. Precise. Kirizen's translator chip processed the words, and her entire body went cold. Rehabilitation assignment concluding in 30 standard days. Transport scheduled. Return mandatory for reintegration processing. Deviation from schedule will result in permanent exile status and criminal charges against host family. 30 days. She had 30 days left. And then she would return to the collective for reintegration. The word was clinical, but Kirizen knew what it meant. They would put her through psychological conditioning. They would erase the thoughts and feelings and experiences that made her question. They would turn her back into an obedient unit of the third production caste. Everything she had learned here, everything she had felt, everything she had become would be stripped away. Sophie came outside rubbing her eyes. What's wrong? Why does everyone look sad? Thomas picked her up, though she was really getting too big for it. We just got some news, sweetheart. Kira has to go back to her people in a month. No. Sophie wrapped her arms around Thomas's neck. She can't go. She lives here now. She's teaching me fractions and history, and we were going to read that new book series together. I know, Thomas said softly, his eyes meeting Kirizen's over Sophie's head. I know. Kirizen stood there on the porch, the message still glowing on the data pad, and felt something break inside her chest. She had spent 30 days learning what freedom felt like. And now she had 30 more days before it would all be taken away. The days after the message arrived felt different. Kirizen moved through the house like a ghost. She still helped Sophie with homework. She still attended community gatherings. But everything felt hollow now, as if she was watching her own life from a distance. Sophie noticed immediately. Children always notice things adults tried to hide. Are you scared to go back? Sophie asked one afternoon. They were sitting in the garden, supposedly weeding, but neither of them had touched a plant in 10 minutes. Yes, Kirizen admitted. There was no point in lying. Then don't go, Sophie said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. I do not have a choice, Kirizen replied. The collective has ordered my return. If I refuse, your father will face criminal charges. You could be punished because of me. Sophie's face scrunched up in thought. There has to be something we can do. This isn't fair. Fairness is not relevant, Kirizen said automatically, then stopped herself. That was collective thinking. She had learned so much here, but the old programming still surfaced when she was stressed. That evening, Thomas was unusually quiet during dinner. After Sophie went to bed, he pulled out his data pad and started reading. Kirizen cleaned the kitchen, trying to ignore the growing dread in her chest. Kira, Thomas said finally. Come sit down. I need to show you something. She sat across from him at the table. Thomas turned the data pad so she could see the screen. I've been doing research, he said. Human governments have something called asylum protocols. They're designed for people fleeing persecution or authoritarian systems. If someone can prove they'll face harm or unjust treatment if they return to their home government, humans can offer them legal protection. Kirizen stared at the screen. The words swam before her eyes. Asylum, she repeated slowly. It's not a simple process, Thomas continued. You'd have to file paperwork, testify before officials, prove your case, and if they grant it. He paused. If they grant it, you can't go back. Ever. The collective would strip your citizenship. You'd be legally dead to them. You'd never see your birth world again. Never see any family you might have there. The weight of those words settled over Kirizen like a physical thing. Never return. Never see the crystalline spires of the home city. Never walk the breeding halls where she had been created. Never stand in the production facilities where she had worked for years. But what was there to return to? A caste system that denied her value. A government that punished questions. A life without choice or connection or meaning. A reintegration process that would erase everything she had become. I do not know what to do, she whispered. I know, Thomas said gently. And I'm not going to tell you what to choose. This has to be your decision. Not mine. Not Sophie's. Not the collective's. Yours. Your decision. Those words again. They had terrified her when she first arrived. Now they felt different. Powerful. Terrifying still, but in a new way. Over the next week, Kirizen agonized. She barely slept. Her thoughts circled endlessly. Stay or go. Freedom or home. Choice or duty. The questions had no easy answers. Sophie watched her with worried eyes. One morning, Kirizen found an envelope on the kitchen table with her name written in Sophie's careful handwriting. Inside was a piece of paper covered in the child's writing. Reasons Kira should stay, the title read. Below it, Sophie had written a list. 1. She's my friend and I love her. 2. She's really good at teaching and makes learning fun. 3. She's part of our family now. 4. Sarah and Carlos and Maya like her too. 5. She laughs at my jokes, even the bad ones. 6. Dad is happier when she is here. 7. She deserves to be free. 8. She deserves to choose her own life. 9. We will protect her. 10. She belongs here. Kirizen's hands shook as she read the list. For the first time since arriving on this world, she felt moisture gathering in her compound eyes. Valkyrie could cry, but it was considered shameful. A sign of weakness. But as the tears fell, Kirizen did not feel weak. She felt something breaking open inside her chest. Sophie found her there, crying quietly over the list. The child climbed into the chair beside her and wrapped small arms around Kirizen's thorax. It's okay to be scared, Sophie whispered. Dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. That night, Kirizen had a nightmare. She was back in the collective, strapped to a reintegration chair. The machines hummed around her. Her memories began to fade. Sophie's face disappeared first. Then Thomas's. Then Sarah and Carlos and Maya. Then the taste of human food and the sound of laughter and the feeling of being asked what she wanted. Everything that made her herself dissolved into nothing, leaving only an empty unit ready for assignment. She woke gasping, all four arms clutching the blanket. The room was dark and quiet. But it was her room. In Thomas's house. On a human world where people chose their own paths. The next morning she found Thomas in his office. He looked up from his work, concern on his face. I want to file for asylum, Kirizen said. Her voice shook, but the words came out clearly. I want to stay. I want to choose this life. Thomas stood up slowly. Are you sure? Once you file, there's no going back. The collective will know. They'll revoke your citizenship. You'll be giving up everything you've ever known. I am giving up a cage, Kirizen said. I am choosing a life. Thomas smiled. Then let's get started. The paperwork took hours. Kirizen had to answer hundreds of questions. Describe the collective system. Explain why she feared returning. Detail the reintegration process. Provide evidence of persecution. Every word felt like a betrayal of her people, but also like a declaration of truth. The deadline for her return drew closer. 20 days. 10 days. 5 days. The asylum application was submitted to the human colonial government. They promised a quick review given the time constraints, but bureaucracy moved slowly even among humans. 3 days before the scheduled return, Kirizen still had no answer. She tried to continue normal routines, but everything felt suspended. Waiting. Uncertain. 2 days before the return date, Sophie refused to go to school. She sat in Kirizen's room and held her hand. One day before the return date, Thomas received a message. The asylum hearing was scheduled for the following morning, 2 hours before the collective transport was due to arrive. That night, none of them slept. They sat together in the living room. Sophie curled against Kirizen on one side. Thomas sat on the other. They did not talk much. There was nothing left to say. The morning arrived gray and cold. Kirizen dressed in the simple clothes Thomas had given her weeks ago. Not the gray uniform of the collective. Colors, blues and greens. Human clothes for a life she might be about to claim. The hearing was scheduled for 8 in the morning. The transport was scheduled for 10. 2 hours. Her entire future would be decided in 2 hours. As they prepared to leave for the government building, Thomas's communication device buzzed with an alert. His face went pale as he read the message. 3 collective warships just entered orbit, he said quietly. They're demanding your immediate return. They're calling you stolen property. Kirizen felt her legs weaken. The collective had sent warships. For her. One small rebel who had dared to ask questions. Sophie grabbed her hand fiercely. We're not giving you back, the child said, her voice shaking but determined. You're not property. You're Kira. You're our family. Thomas put a hand on Kirizen's shoulder. The hearing is in 30 minutes. Whatever happens, we face it together. Are you ready? Kirizen looked at them both. This human and his child who had given her something the collective never had. Choice. Dignity. Love. I am ready, she said. They walked out of the house together as collective warships hung in the sky above them like a threat made real. The government building was filled with people. Human officials sat behind a long table at the front of the room. Kirizen recognized some faces from community gatherings. Others were strangers in formal clothing. Armed security stood by the doors. The air felt heavy with tension. A collective representative appeared on a large screen. His chitinous face showed no emotion, but his voice carried clear threat. The criminal Kirizen must be returned immediately. She is property of the Valkyrie Collective, assigned to rehabilitation. Human interference constitutes theft and will be met with appropriate response. The lead human official, a woman named Director Chin, stood calmly. Kirizen is not property. She is a sentient being who has requested asylum under human law. We do not return individuals to face persecution or unjust treatment. She is a criminal, the collective representative insisted. She spread ideological contamination. She questioned the natural order. She must undergo reintegration. Reintegration, Director Chin repeated. Explain what that process entails. The representative's antennae twitched. That is internal collective business. Not subject to human inquiry. It becomes our business when someone requests our protection from it, Director Chin said firmly. Kirizen, please come forward. Kirizen stood on shaking legs. Sophie squeezed her hand one last time before letting go. Thomas gave her an encouraging nod. She walked to the front of the room, all 4 arms trembling. Director Chen's voice was gentle. Kirizen, in your own words, tell us why you are requesting asylum. Kirizen looked at the collective representative on the screen. At the human officials watching her. At Thomas and Sophie in the audience. At the security guards and the strangers and everyone waiting for her to speak. She took a breath and began. In the collective, I was born into the 3rd production caste. I did not choose this. No one chooses. From the moment of creation, your entire life is decided. What you will do. Where you will live. Who you will mate with. What you will think. I worked in manufacturing facilities for years. I was efficient. Obedient. I never questioned anything. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Then one day I asked a simple question. Why could some castes access education while others could not? Why were choices forbidden? The answer was that questions themselves were forbidden. I was labeled contaminated. Dangerous. A threat to order. And your sentence? Director Chin prompted. I was sent here as punishment. To live among humans who the collective considers chaotic and primitive. They believed witnessing your disorder would teach me to appreciate collective perfection. Kirizen's mandibles clicked in what humans would recognize as bitter laughter. Instead, I learned what I had never known before. I learned that beings can choose their own paths. That disagreement does not require punishment. That value comes from existence, not from productivity. That connection and love and curiosity are not weaknesses but strengths. The collective representative's voice cut through sharply. Precisely. The contamination has deepened. This confirms the necessity of immediate reintegration. Tell them what reintegration means, Director Chin said to Kirizen. Kirizen's voice dropped. Reintegration is psychological conditioning. They strap you to a chair. Use machines to access your neural pathways. They erase memories. Suppress emotional capacity. Remove all traces of individual thought. When the process is complete, you are no longer yourself. You are just an empty unit ready for reassignment. A murmur ran through the room. Even the human officials who had read the reports looked disturbed hearing it described directly. They will erase who I have become, Kirizen continued, and her voice broke. They will take away Sophie teaching me what friendship means. Thomas showing me that vulnerability is courage. Sarah and Carlos and Maya welcoming me into community. They will strip away every moment of joy and choice and freedom I have experienced here. They will turn me back into what I was before. And the being standing before you now will cease to exist. Director Chin looked at the screen. That is what you want us to return her to? Collective law is absolute, the representative stated. Individual preference is irrelevant. Not here it isn't, Director Chin said firmly. She turned to the other officials. I move that we grant Kirizen's asylum request based on credible fear of persecution and psychological harm. All in favor? Hands rose around the table. One by one. Until all 5 officials had voted yes. Asylum granted, Director Chin announced. Kirizen, you are now under the protection of the human colonial government. You cannot be extradited or returned against your will. The collective representative's image flickered with anger. This is an act of aggression. The warships in orbit have orders to retrieve collective property by force if necessary. Then I suggest you reconsider those orders, a new voice said. A human military officer stepped forward. Because if you fire on this colony, you will be firing on a human settlement. And the human defense fleet will respond accordingly. I have 3 cruisers entering this system right now. Are you prepared to start an interstellar incident over one person? The silence stretched long and tense. Kirizen held her breath. Would the collective really start a war over her? Was one rebel really that important to them? Finally, the representative spoke, voice cold and clipped. The collective formally revokes the citizenship of the criminal formerly known as Kirizen. She is declared legally dead. Any Valkyrie who provides her aid or contact will face prosecution. This conversation is concluded. The screen went dark. The warships in orbit turned and departed within the hour. Kirizen stood frozen. Legally dead. Citizenship revoked. Everything she had feared and chosen anyway. The weight of it crashed over her and she collapsed. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground. I'm here, he murmured. Sophie's here. We're all here. You're safe. I can never go home, Kirizen whispered. You are home, Sophie said, wrapping her small arms around Kirizen. This is home now. The days that followed were strange. Kirizen grieved for what she had lost even as she celebrated what she had gained. Some nights she cried for the world she would never see again. Other nights she laughed with relief that she would never be forced back into that cage. The news of her asylum spread quickly. Not just through the human colony but through the broader galactic community. A Valkyrie defector speaking openly about collective oppression. Other species began asking questions. Why did the collective need such strict control? What were they afraid of? 3 weeks after the hearing, another Valkyrie arrived at the colony. A male from the 2nd technical caste. He had heard Kirizen's testimony and decided to request asylum himself. Then another came. A female from the 4th agricultural caste. Then 2 more. The human colonial government established a support program. And they asked Kirizen to help run it. 6 months later, Kirizen stood in a small classroom. 12 Valkyrie sat before her, all recent defectors. All struggling with the same overwhelming freedom she had once found terrifying. Choice is difficult, she told them. You have spent your lives being told what to do, what to think, what to be. Now you must decide for yourselves. It will be frightening. You will doubt yourself. You will grieve what you have lost. But I promise you, the being you become through your own choices will be more real than anything the collective assigned you to be. After class, she walked to the community center. Thomas and Sophie were waiting for her. They had dinner plans with Sarah and her family. How was your first day teaching? Thomas asked. Terrifying and wonderful, Kirizen admitted. Like most things here. Sophie grabbed her hand. Dad and I were talking. We want to make it official. We want you to be legally part of our family. Not as a guest or a friend. As family. Is that okay? Kirizen looked at them both. This human and his child who had given her a gift more precious than she could name. They had shown her that she had value simply because she existed. That she could choose her own path. That love was not a weakness but the strongest force in the universe. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That is more than okay. That evening at dinner, Sophie introduced her to Sarah's family with pride in her voice. This is Kira, my sister. Sister. Not servant. Not assignment. Not criminal. Sister. Later that night, as Kira Zen prepared for sleep in the room that was truly hers now, she received a message on her data pad. Anonymous. Encrypted. She almost deleted it, but curiosity made her open it. The message was brief. Coordinates. A location on a Valkyrie border world. And a single line of text. Others want to learn what you know about freedom. Will you teach us? Kira Zen stared at the message for a long time. The collective had declared her dead. Had tried to erase her. Had believed that punishment would break her spirit. Instead, that punishment had given her something they never expected. A voice. A purpose. A future she had chosen for herself. She looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, others were trapped in the same cage she had escaped. Living without choice. Without dignity. Without hope. The collective had sent her to humans as punishment. They had believed exposure to chaos would teach her obedience. They had been wrong. Exposure to freedom had taught her courage. Kira Zen saved the coordinates and began composing a reply. Her story was just beginning. And she would make sure it reached every Valkyrie who needed to hear it. The punishment had become her liberation. The exile had become her home. And the being the collective tried to erase had found the strength to help others find their own freedom. She was Kira Zen. She was no longer anyone's property. She was a teacher. A sister. A voice for those who had not yet learned to speak. And she was finally truly free.